morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Molly Starback, Director of the Office of Postdoctoral Services. And how many of you are postdocs? I see one new postdoc t-shirt, so yay, all right, great. Thanks for coming. And grad students, everybody else is a grad student? Good, thinking ahead. So today we are very pleased to welcome Diego Bohórquez. Did I say that right? I'm sorry, I always mess up. Who is Assistant Professor of GI and Neurobiology in the Duke Department of Medicine. And I met Diego when he was a postdoc here, so on his journey from postdoc to assistant professor. And during that time, he got both an F32 and a K99, and has been outstanding in every way, and is going to tell us about how he tells his story with his research, right? So, and he will also tell us how these awards have shaped his career and helped him on his academic journey. So thanks very much for coming.
Well, thank you so much for coming. The first thing, I really want to give a big shout out to Molly, because when I was a baby postdoc, I got here and she really took me under her wing, and one of the first things that I did was contact your office, and she was always along the way throwing some tips of wisdom. So yeah. Thank you so much.
Although he didn't need much help, honestly.
Second thing, you guys probably, how many of you have gone to grant writing seminars? What have you seen in those grant writing seminars? Some things that just come to mind first. Like, what do you remember from those things?
Make it simple that everyone will understand it. So like also when you do like review, like ask people to review it, that's something that not from your field will review it and see if they get it.
Make it palatable, right? Another thought? Somebody else?
They want everything like a strict framework. Honestly, a couple of things they kind of just have to
frame. Very important word, and I will say context. Somebody else? Anybody else? So I thought that I would share with you something different. And pardon me if it doesn't work, it's very well intended. It's the first time that I'm actually giving this talk. And the reason that I brought it up here is because when I was there not long ago, again, I always wanted like the secret sauce. How can I make it palatable? How it is that everybody can understand it. So I went through this journey trying to find out how it is that great people write. Are they already born with that and they just somehow sit down in front of the computer and then like things just come up and like, and my hypothesis is this, and therefore I will do A, B, C, and please send the money to this university. I'll be the PI. But in that process, I started to learn a lot about the science, the art, and the business behind this story. And today there are no better community that knows about this than people in Hollywood. Okay? And just a couple of weeks ago, I was at Barnes & Noble. Walking around, of course, I went to the magazines, and one of my favorite magazines, The New Yorker. And I thought that this encapsulates beautifully, like, what it is, a story. So, this young lady, looking at her future, she would like to, I think that she would like to place her screenplay into a set out there that it will turn out into this big hit movie, right? And if you guys didn't know, like all of those movies, every single movie out there, it starts from this, a screenplay. And that screenplay, there are some people that have figured out the magic sauce behind that. And what I was excited to see is this. So what I want to share with you guys is, so of course I read those 3 books. So I was thrilled to see that I was learning, I guess, from some of the people that know about it. But I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned from this guy, Mr. McKee. Very interesting guy. I took 4 of his seminars, and because I read his book. So Robert McKee is, I think he's in his late 70s. There is even a character in a movie that was, and the whole movie is actually like, embodies like this character, Robert McKee. The movie is called Adaptation. I don't know if somebody has seen it. And they actually portrayed in there Robert McKee as like, he's this guy that goes and learns how to do screenplay, and he's taking one of the seminars from McKee. Very interesting character. When you get your F32, set aside some money, or even before, and go and take that seminar if you can. The guy is amazing. So, to begin with, what is a story? Let me show you a video clip. One of our favorite video clips in the laboratory.
Snake's eyes aren't very good, but they can detect movement. So if the hatchling keeps its nerve, it may just avoid detection. A near miraculous escape.
So that thing kept you gasping for it, right? That's how you want to grade your F31, your F32. Right? In fact, you know, nobody pays the reviewers to go and, the reviewers actually have to go and read your papers. And I feel like we should infuse even more of these so people can actually go and see it and read it and want to like suck it in, right? So that is the story. So tell me a few things that you remember immediately that come to mind. Somebody?
It keeps you on your toes.
Right? Can you tell us a little bit more, like what it is?
Excitement, you know,
Yeah.
till the end you feel the excitement, what will happen next, what will happen next. I have to go through till end to see what would be the outcome of it.
Yeah, somebody else.
It's life or death for that little girl.
It is that conflict, right? It is something it is at stake constantly. right? Somebody else?
Suspense.
Suspense. So suspense, and I interpret in the sense that you don't know what is coming next, but you know that something is coming next, right?
Yeah.
That something else needs to come next. Somebody else?
Persistence.
That you want to keep going, right? Who? And let me ask you something there. Who wants to keep going in there? Or who is coming? Who is going there? Who keeps walking? Who is, in this case, the iguana, right? But what does the iguana embody?
The viewer.
The protagonist, right? So now we're getting into characters, and like I said, we're all learning right now because, of course, I had a lot of concepts that I have accumulated over the years. But I wanted to share it with you guys because it has really helped, not only like in writing science, but also in like how I give my scientific presentations, and I wanted to unfold them with you. So if we have this as a dialogue, I think that we will all learn in there. So we have the protagonist. What else do you see in there?
The enemy, right? So,
The antagonist.
yeah, and also
Right.
there are many, so it's like a bit overwhelming. So like not a balance at the first view, and then it totally changes.
What is the antagonist? Who is the antagonist?
Reviewers.
Well. who is the antagonist? I mean, it's an obvious one, but I just want to dig a little bit deeper on that.
The snake.
The snakes. You said one word. There are many of them. What does that bring into the context?
Like pity, so you feel like pity for the, I don't know, the other object, I don't know the word. So the chameleon or whatever.
So the iguana, right? So
Insurmountable odds.
Underdog.
the underdog. So what kind of stereotype are you looking at, or archetype are you looking at here?
Hero.
David and Goliath, right? And this is extremely important because the bigger the antagonist it is, the more the protagonist has to do to overcome that and become the hero with the feather in the cap, right? And start to think, how will you adapt that into your science? Because even though it's not as straightforward, you all are working with your molecule of choice, your protein of choice, your cell of choice, your circuitry of choice. And you have already decided, like, tell me your research, like, what do you guys research on? Like, somebody can share a molecule or something? Something that you guys are studying?
Nerve stimulation.
Nerve stimulation. And within nerve stimulation, are you looking at a parameter or something, a molecule or something?
I don't know, we're trying to block nerve activity. I don't have any molecules that we use.
Block nerve activity. Well, so start to think how it is that these patterns, because at the end of the day, you're going to be telling a story. Let me tell you how it is that I became convinced that understanding this will help actually our science in general. I was at the MBL at the Marine Biological Laboratory a few years ago, 4 years ago, and I was a GRASS fellow. And we had the opportunity to invite some speakers to come and talk to the GRASS fellows. There were 12 fellows in the neurosciences, and one of the speakers that we got was Mike Ehlers. I don't know if you have heard of Mike Ehlers. He was the chief scientific officer of Pfizer. Before then, he went through the ranks here as an assistant professor and became an HHMI investigator here at Duke Neurobiology, and he left to Pfizer. And of course, the main question was like, so Mike, you know, how is different here, academia versus industry, right? And then he said something very revealing. He said that, you know what, in industry, we produce data. That's what we produce. In academia, we tell stories. And the reason is that he said, in industry, we already have the story. We just want to prove it if it works or not. And for that, it requires quite a bit of data. But in academia, a lot of times we're looking for the proof of principle, or we're testing this hypothesis, and essentially what we're doing is telling a story, right? And like I said, that is where it comes in the structure of storytelling. And before we go a little bit deeper onto like the characters, the protagonist, the antagonist, and something extremely important, the mentor in there. Let me tell you a little bit of, and this is by no means comprehensive, and please feel free to follow up later on. But I want to leave you with, provide you with just a gist of how the structure of the story works. Okay. So a story, it has essentially, it has three main parts. Okay. It has a beginning, a middle, and end. But here is the difference in a story. A story starts on what it is and ends in what it could be. Because essentially what you're creating in that process is a sense of future. Something happens. And in that process, your protagonist, it is transforming. It has transformed. And it becomes this new person. And you will see that like whether you go into a seminar, whether you experience an accident or something salient, something has changed in you that incites you to tell that story. Okay? And you will see it in the case of the iguana, right? When you saw the iguana, how it is that David Attenborough portrayed the iguana? Is this little youngster, you know, that didn't have a lot of experience. That's why it went in the mouth of the lion, right? And then it actually said that the snakes cannot detect, cannot detect movement. Is that what it said? But can detect heat. No, it can detect,
Can't see, but it can.
it cannot see, but it can sense movement or something like that. So you're like, please don't move, please don't move, please don't move. And then the thing moves his eyes. And then turns around, or her eyes, I don't know. And you're like, oh, what is coming next? And then the antagonist goes after the protagonist, right? All you have to do then, you don't have a choice. You have to root for it, right? So what happened in that process, and this is extremely important for the story that you're going to be telling. In every single experiment that you do, what is extremely important is that you find that inciting incident. This is what sets off your storytelling. And find it in your own personal career, find it in like whatever story, like, or finding somebody that is really good at storytelling. They always have this inciting incident. And in the case of the iguana and the snakes, you know, the snakes were kind of like standing there, they were trying to find something, the iguana was quiet until the iguana decided to move. And that was the inciting incident, because that sets off a chain of events that have to be resolved. So the iguana either dies or survives, but something has to happen. Okay? So that is extremely important in how you're gonna write your story. And you can tell that, like when you're writing your F32 or your K or your R01, it is diabetes, main issue, blah, 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 blah. Although it has a lot of things, this molecule, or you eat this thing, or I do electrical stimulation and guess what, this happened. Therefore, I hypothesize that I'm going to take it this way, right? So when you're writing, whether you bring the reader in 10 pages, hopefully not, but or in 3 sentences into that inciting incident, it is up to you. How do you create those terms that bring that reader into that inciting incident? So that's how McKee explains storytelling. So he says like what was. You know, it was this youngster iguana. You start to tell the story, take these as sentences. You know, you go, you're like, this is how the world it is, however, minus, in addition, plus, however, minus, in addition, plus. So the two most important words in telling a story are and but. Okay? And but is key because it helps you to create conflict. In a story, your ability to create conflict, it is going to be your money in the bank, because you're going to have to resolve it. And as a writer, you're the one that is resolving it in front of the reader, right? Somebody mentioned suspense, right? That's what you're doing essentially, because you're creating conflict. So now that the one starts to walk forward, what is going to happen? You're like, well, but it's just one snake. And then the camera turns around and you see like 10 snakes. And you're like, So that plus, minus, throughout the story, it will build conflict and resolution. And you will see it in your, so I have my hypothesis. And I created this hypothesis, and I created this hypothesis based on A, B, C, D. But I don't know E. E is important because blah, 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 blah. But, you know, this thing is not known. Or this issue or money or something is a problem, right? So those two key words are extremely important in your narrative. So next time that you're writing your paragraph, pay attention how, actually go back and read something that you have written and pay attention where you have placed that and that but, because we all do it all the time. And the beauty of a story or understanding a story structure is that it helps you to put these things in the right place, okay? So, here's where you get to your inciting incident. And that inciting incident, it is a force that creates these conflicts that catalyzes either into like way positive up there or way negative down there, but the world cannot be the same. It needs to be resolved. You have to do something. And these forces are either inner, personal, social, or physical. So in the case of the one, which category do you think that are those forces? So there's no right or wrong answer. Somebody?
Physical.
Physical? Yeah. Somebody else?
Personal.
Personal? Why do you think that it will be personal?
It's running for its life,
So yeah. And that's where it comes in, like pride or like the ability to survive or like life versus death, you know. Physical, it was like you move, now it's in motion, right? You gotta keep going. If you stop, something is gonna happen, right? And even that speed, that it started like, you know, it started going very slow, and then there was that inciting incident, and the speed went really fast until there were like, I don't know, 2 or 3 snakes that wrap around that poor little thing, right? You see how I am forced to say poor little thing because I'm rooting for that thing, right? And that like created a very defined moment that it stopped. So these forces, if you identify those forces in your narrative, that is what is going to help you to create this big chiasm that you have to resolve. As a writer, you're going to have to resolve. And remember, in the case of your grant, that's what you're creating. You're creating a need. And a need that is, the bigger that your need is, the more attractive your story is going to be, because it's going to give you the possibility of putting things in front that you have to resolve, right? And what is going to catalyze, ultimately, there are 2 currents in that journey of, in this case, of the protagonist. There are 2 currents. the obvious one, and the not so obvious one that is driving this force forward. And in this case, both are going to bring the protagonist to that object of desire. What was the object of desire in the case of iguana?
The other block.
Safety.
Joint family, safety, stay alive, somebody said. Something else? Yeah, like that experience. Because imagine now that iguana is ready to be a mentor, right? Now that iguana can tell the story. It survived, it made it, right? So that is extremely important, and that is exactly how you see it in like the most common stories. You know, you see the prince slay the dragon, reach the princess. You know, is that object of desire, and you see it in every single story throughout life. You see these things coming up over and over and over. And in the way that you have written, how many have you written already grants? Yeah, most of you guys. How many have written papers? Everybody, right? Yeah. So go back and look at it. Your introduction, what it was. At some point you create your need. Let me tell you how I'm gonna get there. I got these results. My conclusion is this. Therefore, the world will never be the same. And if you add with more research is needed, then you like just bring it low. Hopefully you leave it with a meme at the end, so it is a whole different level. Now you have created knowledge. And then there is that conscious desire of to survive, but there is also that subconscious undercurrent in there. Somebody wanna bring up some examples of what would that be? What is that subconscious desire? Why do you want to write an F32? The obvious one, get your salary. The not so obvious one.
CV line.
CV line, pride. Right? Something else? Somebody else?
Basic validation.
Validation. That you know how to do it, right? Somebody else. The more ideas you come up with this, like remember, this thing it just gets better.
It's going to help you get your next job.
Yeah, it's going to help you to get that next job, right? And people can immediately see like, oh, yeah, let me tell you, this person is immediately assumed that this person knows how to get money, and he was able to get money because somehow, somewhere, put all of the pieces together and tell a good story. Or a story that people can put money on, right? So that is that subconscious desire. And in the case of the iguana, it's like part of like what I was saying, like it is that inner drive to survive, but at the end of the day, it's part of like, when it joins that clan, it is part of like the wise, the seasoned, the experience. That is that undercurrent in there. And of course, each one of these terms, there are people that have written books about it. So I'm just laying out, hopefully, like some food for thought. So we were talking about the creation of characters with a fellow in the laboratory, because you know, at some point I realized, how do you guys go about writing a paper? Or even better, how do you guys go about like doing a project in the laboratory? I just want to hear it. Tell me, because of course I also had some very similar experience. Somebody else? Somebody here?
You build some background and start trying some things.
So you read, right? Yeah. That's one way. Somebody else in that part of the process?
I like going on observation, so it's some piece of data that I find interesting and unexplainable, go from that.
So observing like where it is, what was, right? what was? Where are we right now? Another way, how do you decide how to do that first experiment? Somebody else has something else?
Hypothesis first and then to test if the hypothesis is right.
So you come up with that hypothesis, and I like to call it, you come up with that idea, right? It's like, oh, this is how it works. And I like to call it an idea because I think that the hypothesis is like really helps you, like narrows it down really early on. And in innovation, people that are, well, Silicon Valley, people depend on innovation constantly. One of the mottos for innovation is, let 1,000 flowers blossom, and you will see which ones stick around. And that's a whole other process, but at the very beginning, if you let some ideas like bubble, you're going to see which ones are worth pursuing, and that's going to be your hypothesis. And that is going to be based on like what you have read, what you have observed. You go and talk to your mentors, right? You go to meetings and start to gather that information, right? Another part of like that process. Somebody else? How do you decide when to do like that first experiment? If you didn't know how to do the experiment, what do you do?
Try to repeat what other people have done first.
Yeah.
And revalidate the data sometimes.
Revalidate the data. Do you go by yourself in front of the bench? Or do you read a protocol? Or do you find somebody to teach you? What do you do?
Read a protocol.
Read a protocol?
See if we can do it or not, or if not, then take some expertise helps.
Yeah, somebody that can help you. Here's where I want to bring up, this is a scene from Karate Kid. All of you probably have seen it. How many have seen this movie? Yeah, classic, right? Because the development of the characters is very overt. So you will see what I mean. This is a beautiful scene in the sense that there is a complete transformation of the character, and it is a whole story on its own. So take it as like a paragraph in your F32, that how it goes from beginning to end. Okay?
Daniel-san! Daniel-san!
What?
Come here. Show me sand floor.
I can't move my arm, right? What are you doing? What are you... Ow! Ow, what are you doing?
Now show me sand floor.
How did you do that?
Shut up!
Second floor.
Stand up. Show me sand floor. Sand floor. Sand floor. Big sucker. Sand floor. Sand floor. Now show me wax on, wax off. Hey!
Wax on, wax off.
Wax on, wax off. Hey, wax on, wax off. Concentrate. Look at my eye. Other hand. Thumb inside. Wax on, hat. Wax off. Wax on, hat. Wax off, hat. Wax on. Wax off. Show me pentaface. Up, down. Up, down. Up, down. Other side. Look, eye. Always look, eye. Show me penthouse. Side. Knuckle wrist. Side. Yes. Show me wax on, wax off. Cat! Show me head defense. Cat! Face! side to side. Yes! 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 From a sand of floor. Yes! 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 Stop! Stop! Wait. Look, always look, come back tomorrow.
So, what do you guys think about the characters? So, of course, then there is the protagonist and the mentor, right? The antagonist, it is the subtext in that case. You know that there is going to be a confrontation, right? That's why there is this preparation, right? So you know that something is going to happen. So when you think about the mentor, what do you think of the mentor? Tell me a few features of the mentor that come to mind.
Taught the foundations first.
Foundations, so extremely important. Principles, not necessarily the formula. This is how the world functions. You know, if you add 1 + 1 and you get 2. No. The world, in a room, there are doors. It doesn't mean that the door has to be square. It could be round, but it's a door. Round on the ceiling, but it's touched to the floor, right? And when you are in your F32, writing your F32, if you're talking about bringing in, you will see a neuronal cell that has some toll-like receptors that are immune receptors. Well, you will learn the principles from the immune cell, right? Because that's the experience cell, right? So, principles. Somebody else? What else can the mentor teach you? Discipline. So it's teaching you along that path. It's teaching you that consistency, right? There is something that is going to be, that is teaching the protagonist how the protagonist is going to be reacting to certain things, right? Somebody else? Something else?
It's feedback.
Feedback, yeah. So, you know, when I was looking at this scene, what is beautiful is like the first thing that says is, Daniel-san, come here. What is that telling you? The kid is not listening. So it's teaching the kid to listen. The first thing has to learn. And to learn has to listen, right? The second thing teaches the principle. It says like, okay, the first thing, before teaching the principles, it actually creates trust. So Daniel-san had gone into his battle, didn't have a lot of practice, fought against the other kids, and then like injured his elbow, right? So what as the mentor comes in, he says, like, come here, and then puts the hand there, heals, and is like, how did you do that, right? It's like, now I trust you. Like, you know something that I don't know, right? So it creates that trust. Then it teaches the principles, and as he lays down the principles, it practices on the principles and then helps the protagonist to master those principles. So the protagonist, it is creating, it is taking in those principles and then emanating something of its own. So that cell that is neuronal and it took a toll-like receptor is not going to be expected to release a cytokine. It may release a neurotransmitter. But you know that those, as you have put in the reader the principles, the reader knows what is going to happen, right? You have created that world. Peter Pan. So if you watch in the first 10 minutes in Peter Pan is going inside of this house and something happens and then no, you go inside of the window, and then in that window there's like Peter Pan, then you get introduced to Tinkerbell, the kids, and something, and then at some point there's like some pixie dust, and ooh, like look at that thing that is flying. So when they come out of it, the kid takes one of the kids takes the pixie dust and puts it on the dog, and now the dog is flying. But by then you just swallowed it, right? Like, oh yeah, of course it's pixie dust. We all knew that it was pixie dust, right? Like, but before going inside of that chamber, you didn't know. That's your first paragraph, where you're establishing these principles and you're creating trust in your reader that you know what you're talking about. And that there's going to be some things that are going to behave in a certain way, right? So, very quickly, I'm going to bring it to what we do in the laboratory. So we study sensory transduction from gut to brain, and a couple of weeks ago, we actually published a paper in Science showing that there are the sensory epithelial cells in the gut that connect to the vagus nerve and transduce a sensory signal from gut to brain in milliseconds. Okay? Now let's put it in context of a storytelling. So, these enteroendocrine cells, the name says it, is a gut cell that produces a hormone, right? So they had a life of hormones. And if we go and see, well, they had a flask-shaped cell, you know, they have something, some of them look differently, they have a lot of different hormones, but some of the description doesn't quite match with what people have described in the literature. Like, for instance, they are involved in appetite, but the hormones that they release only peak after 30 minutes after you're stimulating. Yet when we feel full within a couple of minutes or 5 minutes. We start to feel full, so there's something else that we don't know, right? And that will be the object of desire, is how it is that these cells are actually contribute to behavior. Here this is actually an old part of the story. Like at some point we did in the laboratory some three-dimensional reconstruction of the ultrastructure of the cells. So we cut them at like 4 nanometers per pixel resolution, and we started to see a lot of things inside of the cells. Some of the forces in these cells are, you know, that these cells are in the gut mucosa, they are epithelial cells, but they also have elements of transmission, so they are not quite epithelial cells like a normal epithelial cell, and they also have some transcripts that you will find them in neurons. So at that time they were thought to be just a cell that will release a hormone, but they had a lot of features that you will find them in neurons. And what I'm not saying here is that what is the mentor for these cells. The mentor for these cells are other sensory epithelial cells, how the story goes, or other sensory epithelial cells like taste receptor cells in the tongue, or olfactory receptor neurons in the nose, or inner ear cells in the inner ear, where sensory transduction mechanisms have already been developed. So when you go and read the paper, you will see that we bring that power, like the senses, early on. And essentially, once that frame is established, then it's easier to see how it is that the story is like, okay, so if this cell is a sensory epithelial cell or has features of a sensory epithelial cell, most likely there are going to be a lot of features that are shared. And at the end, it comes up that we actually found out that the glutamate is a neurotransmitter in these cells. And it was conserved in 5 other sensory epithelial cells. So it is really easy to, yeah, I see how it is that you found these things. So with that, I just want to leave you with something that I learned from McKee. He always said, write the truth. And it took me, I'm still evolving on that little phrase, because write the truth, essentially for what you guys are doing. You are going and collecting evidence to support your idea, but then you have to write it. And writing the truth doesn't necessarily mean writing what happened. It means accurately writing what happened. And that could be in like very specific, that requires thought around the very specific words that you bring to describe the event that happened. Because if we could, we will be able to devise like a tiny little camera that will bring inside of like the cell of choice or the nerve of choice to show you, to show the rest of the world what actually happens, just like in the case of the iguana. But as scientists, we don't have that luxury, right? Or in some cases, we have that luxury. So what do? We do our Western blot, we do our immunohistochemistry. We'll go and collect a lot of evidence. We pull a quote from somebody else that have found something. And then we put it in a piece of paper, and we expect people to believe around that. And that's why I think it's important to write the truth. So, thank you. And if you have any questions, please do let me know, and I would love to hear some feedback. At least you probably never expected like being a postdoc and then coming to here, coming to watch Karate Kid. Any thoughts, feelings, impressions? I'm scared now. I'm gonna go back to the laboratory. And I should never leave this in again.
I thought it was great. I thought it was one of the most interesting seminars that I've ever seen.
Thank you.
I wonder, like, are people, what do you feel like? Are you like, yeah, you can do this, but I can't do this? Like, what are your feelings?
I mean, I thought it was helpful. It's always nice to, even when you're reading papers and things, have like see the evolution of what they did and why they did it. And I thought it was helpful.
Any other thoughts? I feel like one of the biggest fears that you will have right now is how do I apply this to my science, right? Well, that's where creation of the character comes in. And for that, you need to know everything about your character. You need to know everything about nerve stimulation, for instance. But please tell me, like, in just one sentence, what do you guys work on? We can start in the back, and we still have 15 minutes. So,
Cancer immunology.
Cancer immunology.
Same thing.
Same thing.
I also work on that, so I don't know.
One of the things that I learned from, I was reading, what was it, George Lucas. I was watching one of his seminars. He said, like, you know, in Hollywood, we say, we do exactly the same thing, but we tell it differently. You know? But tell me a sentence of what you guys actually work on. Over there, didn't want to miss you.
I work on zoonotic disease.
Zoonotic disease. Okay, we're getting a little bit deeper. Up.
Protein DNA interactions.
Protein DNA interactions.
On retinal neurophysiology.
Retinal neurophysiology.
Mental health disparities in Hispanic teens.
Hispanic teens? Yeah, mental health disparities. Wow.
Working memory and brain correlates.
Working memory. Brain correlates? Okay.
Fungal pathogenesis.
Oncopathogenesis. Fungal pathogenesis.
Cancer immunotherapy using virus.
Cancer immunotherapy and viruses.
Early life obesity prevention.
Early life obesity and prevention.
Acquisition of cell identity.
Cell identity.
I study a virus that infects everyone but also causes cancer.
Wow.
Trip channels. I know one of your research people, the science one, also connected with the trip channel that AV2 is.
Yeah, trip channels.
Yeah.
Autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease in celiac.
Okay.
How specific cells can survive influenza virus?
Influenza virus.
Genetics of gene regulation in maternal hypoglycemia or in response to rquez.
Developing malaria diagnostics or detecting the low density asymptomatic before.
Malaria diagnosis.
Childhood obesity.
Childhood obesity.
neutralizing antibodies to HIV.
Antibodies and HIV, where were we?
Cell mechanics. Cell mechanics.
Cell mechanics. You already said it? Yeah.
A flow-induced cell mechanical reduction.
Cell mechanics.
And neuroactivity imaging with fluorescence microscope.
Neuroimmune networking during pain.
Neuroimmune and pain.
Sex differences in chronic pain.
Sex differences in chronic pain.
Mycobacterial granuloma formation and integrity.
Mycobacterial granuloma formation and integrity.
Mechanism of host and pathogen interactions.
Host pathogen.
Mechanisms of T helper cell plasticity.
T helper cell plasticity.
Global health.
Global health. What specifically in that?
Well, we try to improve the access and equity of healthcare by introducing like different health policy or insurance policy.
That's one here.
We work on electrical waveforms to control nerve activity, like blockade or causing.
Electrical waveforms to control nerve activity. Great. So you guys saw that each one of you have your own language, right? Now, how do you make that into the mind? And the reviewers in the study section are just like this. We all understand biology, but plasticity for me, maybe, oncogenesis, it takes me like 3 minutes to start to unpack, kind of like set my brain around. Viral pathogenesis and fungal biology, so one of the things that I think that really helps in that early on in that stage, in that first paragraph where you guys are setting, remember, you as the writer, you're not the protagonist. You are the person outside of that story. You have to put yourself outside of that story. And that brings me back to like somebody, when I said like, who is the antagonist? And somebody said like the reviewers, right? No, you're just trying to pass information into their minds. But everything is happening inside. And in that first paragraph, when you introduce your characters, you have to tell it at a level that people will know, oh, I see where this is happening. And that is where it comes, you will have, you guys already saw immediately the parts of the story. And one important point that we didn't talk about, that it was extremely clear in the video of the iguana, is that we went from what it is to what it could be. We saw the inciting incident when the iguana started to move and the snakes started to chase. And then there was an immediate halt. What is that called? What happened when the snakes wrap around the iguana? What is that called?
Climax?
Climax. Climax. So that climax is extremely important in a story. It is that false ending, right? Because you thought that this is it, this is over. Molly looked away, she covered her eyes.
I hate scary movies.
Couldn't see it anymore. And then, but you're like, what happened? Oh, this thing keeps going, So.
I wonder, so you've been awarded the F32 to change topics, I guess. You brought up the Robert McKee, and he offers a lecture, and you also brought up the MBL course that you've taken. In addition to those two, what have been the greatest attributes of these two fellowships you received that propelled you to your career now? What would you definitely recommend if you received the F32, besides maybe the McKee course, you already mentioned that, but what was the strongest attribute that led to your career advancement in science from the F32 that you did maybe outside the laboratory?
Outside of the laboratory.
Right, not just that's science. We're all going to hopefully do amazing science. So I know the MLB course is amazing. Close friend harbors, but what other kind of career advancement?
Those are simply symptoms.
Right.
What that gave me is it was somebody. I think that you brought it up. Somebody brought it up. Validation.
Right.
And it fulfills something inside of me that I can do it. And it helped me to continue going. Now, immediately outside of me, outside of that personal, on the social part, it gave me the freedom to continue exploring what I thought that it was important. And I think that for you guys, most of how the typical postdoctoral fellowship works in is like you're brought into a laboratory and we need to finish in one, right? But I mean, that's the way that should be because somebody's paying you to, is putting all of the resources and you are Daniel San, right? And a lot of times you don't want to listen, you know, as it should be. There's importance in like not wanting to listen to, you know. And I think it's like learning to sift through that information. But the moment that you get your F32, now you have paid your salary and you can bargain for that extra budget that can help you to acquire freedom and build up your own story. Now, how do you use it and how do you negotiate? I mean, that's a whole other science, but that is the importance of it. In my case, it gave me that freedom to continue going. You know. In fact, I will say that in my early, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. So I grew up, I was born and raised in Ecuador in a farm in the Amazon. You can imagine, like, middle of nowhere, right? Came here to the United States, North Carolina State University in 2005. I went to study nutrition, and I did for a while. At some point, a professor put me in contact with Roger Little, who was my mentor, my postdoctoral mentor, and now a good friend, person that I learned so much from. And Roger took me under his wing in his laboratory, but essentially it was like, I have this project and I have this grant, and you know, this is what we need to do, right? And then quickly I started to realize one of the differences that made it there is that these cells that I just showed you had been studied with hormones, with cell lines, with a lot of other things. But Roger had just developed, I spent like 3 years developing these transgenic mice, in which you could actually see the cells. And one of the first things that I noticed when I put them under the confocal was that these cells had these neuropods. That I call it a neuropod, but it was like this very long arm, whereas every textbook will show them as a triangle. And I saw this very long arm. So for 6 months, I think that I went like trying to find, I knew that there was a synapse, but I didn't even know how to select antibodies. So at some point, Roger was like, you know, I think that we're running out of money, you know, and I think that you need to write your F32, and I will support you as far as I can, as you can imagine, right? But, you know, you need to write that F32. And of course, the undercurrent was if I didn't get the F32, I either did something that needed to be done in the laboratory or I had to move on. And I wrote the F32 and thankfully I got it, and I got it on a first try. At that time, I think that was a lot of it was Roger. He was very well, he is very well regarded in NIH. So very important to have a mentor and listen to him. To have a really good mentor, to have a set of mentors, and then like adjust what you know to their guidance. But it certainly gave me that freedom. After that, I was able to go and do more bold experiments, I guess.
Other questions?
Yes, my question is, your K99, is that related to your F32 or is it another independent story? Like how you balance the project of yourself and the project.
Yeah, let me give you a tip. Yeah. So, when I got my F32, the first thing that I put on my desk is sticky note. Now I need to get my K99, right? And I went thinking on K99 until like, when I was running out of time, I sent an email to my program officer and she looked at my CV and she was like, there's no way that you will get a K99 with a CV. She said, like, the people that are applying to this are applying with a Nature paper, say, you know, the classic one. But she did tell me something. He said, in fact, at NIDDK, we don't support K99s. We only give like one every 7th moon. And I was like, she said, but we do like KO1s. I was like, oh, what is KO1? It's exactly the same amount of money minus the R00 phase. But the chances of getting a K99, it was like 11%, whereas the chances of getting a KO1, it was 37%. And here I am, same grant, different chances. Don't settle for, those numbers, like, or what people sell it as, like, I've seen this person with this K99 and like amazing things. I've also seen people with K99 that just were eventually made it into a job that they were just hired because they had a K99 and they just went in and 5 years later ran out of money. And so give yourself options. And that is part of like developing the character. Understand like all of these mechanisms. Talk to the program officer. Don't annoy them. Send them a quick email and say like, here's my specific aims. What do you think? Just 3 questions. If you could answer, does this fit into your program? How do you think, if it does, how can I improve it? Or are there other mechanisms that you suggest? And a lot of times they know people that are like, whether it is underrepresented minority or whether it is a different field. I mean, they know each other. Right? So that is a good way to go about it. And it was on the same, it was a follow-up, but of course it was bigger than, I say bigger in the scope than the F32. That's the other thing that I learned from Roger on the F32. He always told me like, you cannot propose a small enough F32. But what everybody proposes is a too big F32. And trust me, that takes some, like you're going at this level, right? Like I'm gonna get that Nobel Prize. But here is like, I need the money. So point 8 is already done. If you give me the money, I will do point B, and I will be ready for the K99. So, and decompress that from your mind, because I remember in my first 2 aims, it was like, neuropods. I'm gonna confirm that they express S100 beta and neurofilaments, because I had observed that. And for me, it was like, but that's just like 3 days of immunohistochemistry. And then point 2, here's the bold experiment. I'm gonna knock out neurofilaments and I'm gonna see what happens. So it was, don't go, the NIH, the way that they found is things that is done pretty much. And you have heard this, but I almost feel like I always commit that sin. I just go. Thank you so much. And of course, let me know if you have any more.